Welcome to Room to Be,
where there's room to be an informed citizen.
Andy, last week we talked about the foundations, particularly the beginnings of our U.S. Constitution. Today we're going to go beyond words.
Well, we're going beyond words, particularly we're going into the headlines around the world where all these regimes are falling. Egypt last spring, now it seems to be Libya, and everyone's talking, how do you replace an authoritarian regime with a democratic regime?
Building democracy one brick at a time. Andy, one important brick for me is popular elections.
Well, you have to have some kind of electoral system. You have to have some kind of popular sovereignty if you're going to be a democratic government. That government has to rest on the authority of the people. But the type of electoral system you choose can have big ramifications for what your government becomes.
You need more than just an election, Andy, though. You need competing political parties. There needs to be options when you're talking elections. Andy, something else that I think democracies need, another building block, is accountability.
Well, you have to have some kind of government transparency in democracy, which also comes with the right to free press. Citizens have to be able to see what's going on in government to hold those officials accountable.
Say something else, Andy, that I think is important. You need a set of established rights. The minority needs to be protected. I know by definition out there in your classrooms you're learning that democracy is majority rule. People vote and majority wins. But in a healthy democracy, even those minorities receive the same types of protections.
And that goes into the culture that you establish. And this is what James Madison talked about in Federalist 10, where we have these different groups that are allowed to compete, but you need a structure of governments, somehow dividing up government's power so that the majority can rule, but still listening to the minority and not trying to oppress the minority.
And you've talked about liberties such as freedom of the press, but let's not forget freedom of speech. For democracy to be healthy, that voice needs to be heard, and not the popular voice necessarily, that voice that maybe is the gadfly out in the wilderness picking and prodding the government to improve itself.
And you do need some type of system where you have to determine very early on how powerful are you going to make your central government, and you have to assess what your country is like in terms of regions and different factions, in terms of how powerful you're going to make regional governments.
Andy, what we're really talking about, when you build a healthy democracy, we're building a culture of trust. We're building a culture of efficacy where people actually feel they have a voice, something to say in their government. Andy, this doesn't happen overnight. It takes time.
Well, and that's what we call political legitimacy, which is the people's belief that the government has the right to rule. And one of the key fundamental parts of legitimacy isn't necessarily the words we put on paper, but it's the culture that we have in our neighborhoods. Because let's not forget about the very important role of civil society in a democratic government.
You want a healthy democracy, you're going to need more than a living constitution. You're going to need living citizens who are working each day, one day at a time, to build that healthy government. You want to be an educated citizen? We know we're two teachers. No fancy words.
No fancy suits.
Plain talk about issues you need to know.
Just in time.